On, ladies and gentlemen, we are near the halfway point of this Philadelphia 76ers season, and it still feels we have zero idea what this team is going to be. I'm here with Jacob Moreno here to break down what is going on with Paul George, the recent frustrations of Tyrese Maxey, the status of Joel Embiid, which seems continually more mysterious, as well as Jimmy Butler entering the conversation once again. So we're going to dive into a little bit of everything with this Sixers team today. Appreciate each and every one of you guys tapping in with us. So thanks for joining, thanks for hanging, and excited to dive into it. So Jacob, I'll throw it to you right off the bat here. What's your vibe with this Sixers team? I thought we would have a little bit of a better feel at this point in the season. Feels like everything that could go wrong has gone wrong for the most part, but it felt like we were at the stretch where they were starting to gain some momentum, and then there's just been a number of disastrous losses for a variety of different reasons there. So what's your mindset as we start to kick things off here?
I want to first give a shout out to Will Rucker because he made a tweet when the Sixers were 2-11 saying, if you weren't with the Sixers when they're 2-11, don't be here when we're 15-20. And look where we are.
Yep, nailed
But,
it.
anyways, the thing is, right, this team went off to win 8 of their last 11 games like a week ago from the stretch of like late December to early January.
Mhm.
And it looked like, everything was starting to fall into place. Injuries seemed good for the most part. Team was starting to establish some chemistry and be starting to shake off the rust. And then boom, we get in a dogfight with the Wizards and they get destroyed by the Suns. And it's just this whole cycle of getting healthy, more injuries, and then dysfunction, having to build chemistry back up again. And there's a lot of issues you can point to. We're going to talk about Paul George and Tyrese Maxey all throughout this thing. But the biggest thing is injuries because you just can't establish rhythm
Yeah.
without your star players consistently being able to play together. I don't care if it's against the Nets or the Celtics. You need your star players to play together. They just haven't been able to. Paul George and Tyrese Maxey clearly look uncomfortable in the roles with their roles changing. Some nights to the second option, some nights to the third option. Some nights this team just needs them to score 30 apiece to win. So
Yeah.
it's hard to establish consistency. And there's a whole bunch of things that I can get into, but I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, 100% there. And you kind of nailed it that I truly still have no idea what this Sixers team is. I still see the vision and we've seen it for stretches. The Celtics victory certainly being the high point of the season or, what we can hang our hats on at this point. But the reality is, like, there has not been any consistent stretch where we look at, okay, that is the identity of this team. There's been flashes. Thought defensively, they've taken some significant steps forward this year as far as forcing turnovers, getting in passing lanes, all those things. But then there's the games where that's not there. And of course, we still have seen less than a 10-game sample size of Embiid, Paul George, and Maxey on the floor together, and that has to be the identity of this team to an extent. So let's start with the big fella Joel Embiid. That obviously he's the centerpiece of this, and even with the addition of Paul George, the growth of Tyrese Maxey, new guys stepping up, this all revolves around Joel Embiid. He's only played 11 games on the season, and in the matchups that he has played, has not been up to his sky-high standard. 24.4 points per game, 7.9 rebounds, 3.8 assists, shooting 45.2% from the field, 32.7% from three. Nice to see those numbers increase, particularly the shooting splits as he started off the season pretty rough from the field and particularly beyond the arc, shooting around 12% he was for the first couple games there. So good to see that begin to return to normalcy. But with Embiid specifically, it does feel like there's a new thing popping up constantly. That right now it is the foot sprain. And by the way, I will note he has already been ruled out for tomorrow's game with the Pelicans. Paul George upgraded to probable. Andre Drummond, Kyle Lowry, KJ Martin, and Jared McCain also remaining out. But to keep it on Embiid here, what's your level of frustration? In general, I'm pretty lenient with the injury side of things, but it does feel like it's been a bit of a different tune this year. So where are you at on Embiid and your confidence with him health-wise?
I mean, it's the injury report. It doesn't say rest, doesn't say, injury management. So I guess you can't be too frustrated with this front. But like, I understand. Like, obviously, I don't agree with any of this, but like, I understand when fans DM me saying they should trade Embiid. I understand all the fans' frustration because you look at it, right? They pay all this money for tickets,
Yep.
right? And I'm not blaming a guy who's actually hurt, but like at a certain point, like I get the fans' frustration of them wanting to, rebuild, start over, trading him, but like at the same time, like Embiid is still the cornerstone. The Sixers are their best with Embiid playing. They're not going to be better without him or trading for him because even if you trade for him, you're not going to get adequate value back. You just aren't.
Yeah.
But to kind of get back on this topic, what I've noticed from Embiid health wise this season, I mean, it just hasn't been good. It's felt like a lot worse than years past. And we're only in the year 2025, and his max is going to kick in, I believe, next season, right?
Yeah. Correct.
And that's really something to consider because he already is 30 years old. And this is just a huge thing because obviously, even though, we're only in January 9th, Embiid really I don't think he's going to get healthier. I mean, the season's only going to drag on. But in the limited minutes I have seen him, I think he has been solid. I think they should utilize him in the post more. But there was a comment Nick Nurse said
Yeah.
pregame against the Phoenix Suns where he said he wanted Embiid to take 6 to 9 threes per game, which I thought was a little bit crazy. Like Embiid he's a serviceable stretch five, but he's not. You just can't turn him into Brook Lopez. You
Yeah.
just can't because the biggest question I saw when I saw that report is, well, who's going to create all these threes for him? Because Paul George is a good playmaker. He makes basic reads, but he's nothing special. He's not a James Harden off the pick and roll that could create Embiid so much space. Tyrese Maxey, his playmaking only seems to get maximized when he is in the pick and roll with Embiid, but he's not a guy who can make these crazy reads and go draw up all this space either. So having him in this stretch five role when the team desperately needs him to be the offensive engine and kind of thrive creating for himself and others in the post, I just don't agree with that. But overall, health wise, I mean, there's really not much you can say. I mean, it just seems like his body is failing him at this point. So, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like we're closer to the Joel Embiid breaking point than we ever have been at any other point before. And that's frustrating to say. And if I want to take a completely neutral, objective opinion on this, it's kind of amazing that his body has lasted the way it has at this point in his career. When you think back to he had the injury risks, the red flags, that's the reason that he dropped to the third pick in the draft as he was injured leading up to it. It's never a good sign to see big men with foot issues. And he's obviously dealt with much more than that. The notable several meniscus tears that we're clearly seeing the effects of now, a ton of other injury issues that he has dealt with, other foot injuries, re-breaking that. The list goes on for Joel. So it is kind of incredible that he survived the way that he has, entering age 31 now, being a guy that has this accomplished resume, has won MVP, has won all these All-Star games, and frankly, seems to be on the outside looking in for this year. But the reality is, you're absolutely right. They won't ever get equal back in a trade, and that's kind of always the story with a big-time star. But I think, for starters, he's ineligible to be traded this year, so this is a conversation that gets pushed till the offseason, but it does feel to me like we're a bit up closer to that than ever before. And I will also note, for guys like Paul George and Tyrese Maxey, the hope really was this year that we could rein back kind of the level of expectation for Joel, that he didn't have to be the grade A number one clear-cut guy on an every game basis. That was the appeal of bringing in these other stars for Paul George specifically here. Now that we see it, he kind of still has to be, man, that we're kind of seeing both these guys look like the complementary pieces. And let's start right with Paul George. Obviously, a guy that we haven't seen a super large sample size of to this point, and a variety of roles changing as well. But as far as his stats on a season, 16.2 points, 5.6 rebounds, 4.6 assists, shooting 41.4% from the floor, 33.5% from three. I'm a little bit frustrated from the standpoint of I think he's trying to fit in a little bit too hard. There's points that you can look at that he's been excellent defensively, that side of the ball, getting his hands in passing lanes, generating turnovers. And he's been a guy that has been very, non-disruptive is a way to put it. But we also haven't seen him really take over at all. And in the matchups that Embiid misses, we have not seen him flash to be this 1A guy, which he has at other points in his career. So where are you at on Paul George at this current point in time?
I think through all our episodes doing this, we've both been very lenient on Paul George,
Yeah.
very understanding of his injuries and the value he's bringing, not scoring the ball. So I'm not going to get into that. We know he's a solid playmaker. We know he's a good defender, but that's not what the team needs right now.
Yeah.
Well, it's at least not their biggest need. Their biggest need is for him to step up as a scorer, especially when Embiid is out. And he's done it very inconsistently. Like I said, I think I don't care if you can give me 30 against the Hornets. I
Right.
want you to give me 30 against the Suns on Monday. And I think the biggest issue was his shot diet. I mean, if Nick Nurse is worried about changing anyone's shot diet, it should be Paul George's because these contested pull-up twos over multiple defenders, they're not going to fly. And it's just not good offense when Embiid's either in or out. It's just not going to work. I've been preaching that you need to put him in more pick and rolls, especially with Drummond. I think that could be an ideal solution, especially when Embiid's out, and just get to the rim more.
Yeah. That's the one for me.
Paul George, just get him easy, high percentage looks. Paul George isn't a guy who could consistently create off the bounce anymore. He's just not. So try to utilize him as the versatile scorer he is. And Nick Nurse is just failing to do that. And I'll get into the whole offense thing a little later, but that's my biggest takeaway with him. And I think he needs to be used as a catch and shoot player
Yeah.
more so than a creator as well. But that's also on Maxey, who we'll also get into.
Yeah, 100% there. And for the Paul George haters out there, that's the number one thing that we pointed to is the shot diet or the casualness that he goes about his approach and the way that he's completely comfortable settling for those tough twos. And it's like different. Again, every time I make this comp, I say that I hate that I do it, but I'm going to do it again. When you think about Tobias Harris, like it was the dribble, the back in, that kind of, that's not Paul. Like he's dance on the perimeter, do a couple like sidestep moves that really don't move a defender or create any sort of space there. And then he just rises up and shoots over you because he is real deal 6'8", 6'9", with a guy that is a very good shooter. He can still do that. But there are these frustrated stretches that if that is going to be your shot diet, you're going to get inconsistent production because that's what happens when you shoot from there. To contrast him directly with a guy like Kelly Oubre Jr. right here, Kelly has been excellent this year at just putting his head down, being physical, and attacking the basket, dunking whatever he can, getting to the rim. That is what there needs to be more of from Paul George. I understand he's not going to turn into an Aaron Gordon or a Kelly Oubre at this point in his career. He is to an extent, but you got to have a counter when those shots aren't falling. And that's kind of what it's felt like to me this year is it looks great when he is feeling it, when he is hot, when the jumper is going down. It doesn't feel like there is this fallback plan if that is not the case there. But any other real takes on Paul George? We'll bring back the whole piece together, but I do want to go a little more in depth on Maxey.
Yeah, I think there's one more thing I forgot to
Sure.
point out. Post game against the Suns, I believe Austin Krell and a few others asked Nick Nurse about the offensive process with George, and Nick Nurse pretty much said that he's tried to talk to Paul George a few times, seeing if there's any more things they can do, any more actions they can run. And Paul George said, "We're all right," which I found a little bit weird from two sides. One, Nick, you're the coach. If you feel like there needs to be adjustments,
Sure.
then you make them, right? But on the other hand, Paul George not really wanting to change anything or make any adjustments. I think on one side it would speak to his confidence, but other side it may speak to his arrogance. So I'm just saying, if Nick Nurse is consulting you, seeing like if there's anything he can do, then you needed to try to like make adjustments. Like you said, have any type of counters. Like you can't keep settling for these
Right.
pull up mid ranges from 18 feet.
Yeah, no, you nailed it there. That also was kind of surprised me, that whole interaction. And I also didn't love the quote from Nick Nurse where they were asked specifically about like, what do you need to do to get Paul going? And he's just like, to be honest, like he took 18 shots tonight. I believe he shot 5 for 18 this night. He took 18 shots and I'm pretty all right with like 14 of them. And I kind of wasn't watching that game. Like that is
Oh,
not how I felt about that shot diet. So I don't know. Once again, we need the whole piece of the puzzle to come together before I'm being too hard on Paul George. But my frustration has certainly hit an all-time high during his Sixers tenure and would just like a couple more flashes of being that guy. But another guy who I've been underwhelmed with the amount of flashes that we have seen has been Tyrese Maxey. Now, to Tyrese's credit, he is out there battling far more often than either of the other two stars ahead of him. But to give the production for him on the season, he's averaging 25.5 points per game, 5.7 assists, 3.3 rebounds, shooting 42.1% from the field, 33.8% from three, shooting a career worst at the rim this year, has really struggled on a lot of those finishes that I would consider a strength of him, looking at the larger sample size of his career. And the other part that's been really interesting is we know Tyrese Maxey as this positive, upbeat, smiling guy, and it's been the opposite of this year, that we see him constantly complaining to referees, looking more frustrated on the floor than ever. I understand the Sixers team is losing, and Tyrese has been open about this is the most he's ever lost really in his entire lifetime, dating back to high school, AAU, the whole deal here. But it's not what this team needs right now, and kind of frustrating that it feels like he's kind of soaking up some of the bad habits of Joel Embiid here. But let's keep it on Tyrese Maxey directly. What are you seeing from him on the floor and with kind of the way that he's going about his approach at this point in the game?
I want to touch on a specific stretch in the game last night in the fourth quarter where it felt like the Sixers were getting every bad call.
Mm-hmm.
But as I said on Twitter, I'll say it again. I don't care about officiating. You cannot be down 99-98, whatever the score was for a brief moment, to the Washington Wizards, who
Yeah.
were on a second end of a back to back, ranked 30th in both offensive and defensive rating, and have the worst record in the league. It can't happen. I don't care how many bad calls there are.
Yep.
And you really saw for a second Maxey complaining about literally everything. And Nick Nurse was too, and it was making the team lose focus. I was seeing it with my 209s. They were getting beat in transition. There was two plays that ended up with Caleb Martin chewing down the shot clock, posting up from the nail, which flattered me. So it's just like like complaining, it takes away from the actual game and the actual composure. And we really saw that. against the Washington Wizards. And I don't mean to go on a tangent. I'll bring it back to Maxey in a second. But like
No, you're right.
the Sixers can't act like they're too good against a team like the Washington Wizards. Sixers haven't proved that they are up there with the Bucks, the Knicks, the Celtics, the Cavs. Like they shouldn't have this like ego approach where they can kind of play down the competition because right now they are that competition,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
And by the
But no,
way,
to go back
it's
to
been that way for years. Like this is yes, this is new faces, a new season. And I would probably say it's on an all-time high for display. But we've seen these casual performances to which they don't show up for several years now. That's been kind of a bad trait of this team, and I don't understand why they have this overconfident vibe. Because what have you done as an organization? Every single one of you guys, like you shouldn't be capable or comfortable carrying yourself this way. But I absolutely agree. I thought last night was a prime example of that.
yeah, but back to Tyrese Maxey. I mean, the thing that astonished me the most last game, especially, is I think he shot 13 shots in the first half. 10 of them were from beyond the arc,
One of
and a
10.
lot of them, yeah,
Mhm.
and a lot of them, it just felt like he either settled or they were like forced, like because I know there were a few actions for him to kind of get him going, but it just felt like he settled for the three, and he's just consistently failing to play at his own pace. Like feels like he rushes stuff, whether it's pull up threes or trying to do a whole like wrap around at the rim where he gets met with two defenders, and that's a big thing of why he doesn't get calls. He kind of just flails in the air and kind of goes through the motions and not he's not trying to like force his way in to actually draw the contact, and that's why he's getting upset. But I just think the whole Maxey's whole decision making is truly inconsistent. I think throughout that stretch where they won 8 of 11 a few weeks ago, he had a perfect balance of scoring and playmaking. Like he looked like the best player on the team. But now because Embiid has been in and out, I feel like he's reverted to some of his bad habits that we've seen throughout the first 2 months of the season, whether it's, getting met by 2 or 3 defenders and forcing a bad shot, not playmaking, or just settling for poor threes. And just like his demeanor is showing it. Like this is not the same Tyrese Maxey the whole city grew to love in
Yeah.
2021 to now.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. And there's a couple different directions that you can go with this. Like, obviously, expectations change when a guy gets paid. And that is the case with Tyrese Maxey, that he is no longer this fun young prospect who could grow into this awesome player. He's an all-star guard who is paid as a max player and expected to deliver as one. I think there's an extent of he feels that pressure himself and is trying to, raise the floor of this team in a way that they have not had success with this year. But it's kind of just like it's a harmful process if that is the mindset, because none of this helps anyone. And it's, I think, so telling or so obvious with Tyrese because it's such a contrast to what we've seen from him in years past. I have not seen him play with joy all season, and I get like joy doesn't win you games, but it's something that I think was I'll put it this way. Look at the contrast between Jared McCain and Tyrese Maxey this year. Now, Jared is in a category of his own for his happy approach to life and the way that he plays basketball, but the fact that there was that much of a gap was kind of shocking to me, that Tyrese was the all business approach, the guy that was screaming at officials, talking trash, doing all these things. It's like, I just didn't know him to be that guy. And while like in general, I think you can squint your eyes and look at it as a net positive that he has that nastiness, the killer instinct to him, all those things. It just is not being, I guess, centralized in the right ways in a lot of situations. And I do think it is feeding into his game. I think he feels the frustrations. I haven't loved the shot diet of him either. 1 of 10 from 3 in the first half last night was brutal. I see the comments coming in. Appreciate you guys getting involved in the conversation, saying he's shot chucking, all these kind of things. I get it. Like, I get the frustration. And I also will note, like, the actual point guard play on this team we knew was kind of going to be a weakness going into this year. That sort of, if you look at this team fully constructed, the Sixers as a whole, you basically are hoping the playmaking ability of Paul George, Joel Embiid, and Tyrese Maxey collectively can be enough to run an offense. None of these guys individually are elite creators or playmakers. They're just not. I think for all the anti-Kyle Lowry people, and I hear you, that's the whole reason that he's on this roster and getting starts, is because they don't have a guy that can really set the table for others. For Tyrese specifically, do you have hope that he can kind of grow into those shoes better as the year progresses? Or do you kind of, and I lean more towards this side of things, that's probably just not going to be the way to use them, and you got to find a way to answer that.
I think first with Kyle Lowry that I agree with you. That is why he was brought to the team. But for some reason, I think like we mentioned, he's been used in this spot up shooter role. And
Sure.
it worked for the first 5 games, but like that's not utilizing him to his strengths. But back to Maxey, I think he's making me look really stupid because all off season I had all this faith in him that he could develop into a very good playmaker, and he just hasn't shown that at least consistently. And I think at this point, obviously he's under 25 years old. He still has so much room to grow, but I think at this point he is a limited playmaker at this point because you look at his playmaking with and without Joel Embiid. Without him, he just has performances like we saw last night: 29 points on 27 shots, forcing a lot of things, not taking advantage of his gravity. But when Embiid's in, when they run the two-man actions where he's drawing defenders and creating, I think that's when he's his best. So I think he's just a guy who can make basic reads, have an impressive skip pass or two every often now and then. But yeah, I think he's a limited playmaker, and I think that Embiid's gravity and his pick and roll play and his post play is the best source for offense of this team.
Yeah. No, I do think you're right there. And I did want to shout out to Davon here in the chat. I'm trying to get the super chat pulled up, but it's giving me some issues here. But appreciate that. And he comments saying this team has taken on the attitude of Joel. I think we are wrong from his history. I think this team has taken on the attitude of Nick Nurse. So interesting perspective there. I will say the vibe that Nick Nurse gives off is kind of not what I expected. And I mean, for a couple different reasons here. I kind of had this perception of Nick Nurse when he came to Philadelphia that he would be like this mad scientist, trying different lineups, trying different formations, rolling out different sets. And, like that was where he came from. That really has not proven to be the case, that there's a lot of kind of the same recycled stuff, not trying young guys. I've seen all the comments calling him another version of Doc Rivers, all those type of things. And I do think, like, from an attitude perspective, to Davon's point here, I hated every bit of how he handled the entire Joel Embiid process at the start of the year. I understand that he's probably as frustrated, more frustrated than any one of us out here, and really had no feel on the entire situation. But you just got to do a better way of dressing it up and being that face of the franchise. That's one of the responsibilities that falls on the coach there, and I don't think he's done a particularly good job of handling that. So, Jacob, what do you think of that criticism about Nick Nurse specifically, and do you think it's fair to assess that this team has taken on a bit of his personality?
I think I was a little bit too high on Nick Nurse when the Sixers hired him. I'm
Yeah.
just gonna come out and say it because I've talked to Raptors fans, I've talked to knowledgeable people, within the social media community, and like he really is just the definition of a ceiling raising coach. He uses players, he maximizes players to their strengths. We saw 2019 Raptors, but he isn't a floor raising coach, which is what the Sixers are in great need of right now. He's not that creative. I thought he was much more creative, but he just really isn't. His offense is very stale. It's either without Embiid, it's either just Maxey and Paul George isos or a quick pick and pop with Yabusele, and it's just the creativity, the lineups. There's just so much that are lacking. But as far as how he handled the Embiid situation, I completely agree. I think giving reporters of like an attitude, giving like weird like answers, like weird hints. I think it was really poorly handled. But I also think that Daryl Morey was supposed to, or at least should have
Face
had
the
a press
music.
conference to address the media. But
Yeah.
overall, I didn't like how Nick Nurse handled that at all. And yeah, I think they have taken on his attitude because I'll point back to that stint in the Wizards game last night where he was literally just screaming at the refs in like 2 minutes of crunch time, and the Sixers are getting dusted in transition. And that's how the Wizards built a 3-point lead. The lack of composure, the lack of focus was really disheartening and just honestly frustrating to watch. And I know, like, we thought of Nick Nurse like throughout the Sixers battles with the Raptors. We thought like we saw him as like this fiery guy, right? This guy who like gets pissed. This guy who like instills a culture. I mean, we saw that from the outside looking in, but he's really just not doing that. And like for him to do that, explode to the refs, and have this weird nonchalant attitude during losses or pressers, it's just weird. And like I'm not expecting him to like go crazy or like mouth off or get fined in post game conferences, but like it feels like he just has this still weird like nonchalantness, like numb type of vibe, and it's just I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I have been underwhelmed and kind of surprised on my whole takeaways from now. I really thought I was going to be far more impressed than is the current situation, but appreciate the comment in the super chat, Devon. To keep it rolling here, I do want to slide into what is really the hottest story of the NBA right now, and that is, of course, the Jimmy Butler experience down there in Miami. So it is the beginning of the end. I think we all know how this situation has gone. We've seen it in multiple situations and in multiple locations now. But we did get earlier this week from Shams Charania saying that Jimmy Butler has been suspended for 7 games for multiple instances of conduct detrimental to the team over the course of the season, and particularly the last several weeks. He then quote tweets that and says, "The Heat say they are opening to listening to all Jimmy Butler offers. Quote, through his actions and statements, he has shown he no longer wants to be a part of this team. Jimmy Butler and his representatives have indicated they wish to be traded. Therefore, we will listen to offers." So let's start right here on just Jimmy Butler in general. What's your feeling or level of surprise that this is shown to the surface, and your thoughts on Jimmy as a whole as a basketball player in the year 2025?
Doesn't shock me at all. I mean,
Yeah.
I think I read somewhere that he was just mad that the Heat weren't able to get anyone. They weren't able to get Dame. They weren't able to get Drew. Whatever. They really just have just remained stagnant throughout, like in terms of like big moves. And obviously, the Heat had a couple of like cute finals runs, but like they were never a serious like regular season team besides 2022, where they got Kyle Lowry in the offseason. So I think his frustration is understandable, but the Heat, they're a team, great scouting, great at finding diamonds in the rough to kind of get you to the playoffs. But yeah, I kind of see it there. But I think in terms of him wanting to go out, it's understandable. And I think obviously we could see it getting to this point, especially with the comments Pat Riley made about Jimmy Butler in the postseason. That whole live where Jimmy said none of this would happen if he was here, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And Pat Riley pretty much just said, right, like, if you're not playing, shut your mouth. And I'm sure knowing both of their personalities, that obviously didn't end well. And obviously it didn't. So here we are. And I saw something that the Suns are deeply interested in him.
Yeah.
And I just think it makes zero sense for both teams. I think from a fit perspective, it makes sense for the Suns. But my thing is, even if the Suns get Jimmy, they're not better than the Thunder. They're not better than Memphis. They're not better than the Mavs. Like, it just doesn't put you over the top. I think it improves them, but it's not going to raise their ceiling to a degree where they're like immediately favorites at all. So I think that's on the Sun side, it's stupid to trade for him and waste all the minimal draft capital you already have. And it's stupid for Miami to accept Beal because he would have to waive his no trade clause. It doesn't really improve Miami, especially with the strides Tyler Hero was making.
Yeah.
And on the
Who's been
Phoenix
great.
Suns side, yeah. And on the Phoenix Suns side, they said, according to Kendrick Perkins, so I don't know how valuable this is, but the Suns would plan to extend him for 2 years on 115 million, which is just absolutely insane considering their payroll already. So it's just a weird fit for both sides. But I would end the segment saying I've never seen a media like cheer for a team. It's just so weird. Miami Heat media, the way they all side with Pat Riley and report with so much bias and disdain. It's kind of hilarious.
Yeah, it is strange the way that things go out, and Pat Riley, I would say, beats his own drum in a way that very few, really no other general manager does. Like even like the statement and the way that he goes about things, all these type of things. It's very unique that Pat Riley handles things the way that he does, and I do agree with you from the media standpoint there. Now, I understand this is not a likely situation. In fact, I would probably argue it's an impossible situation. But theoretically, if the offer was on the table right now, 1-for-1, Paul George for Jimmy Butler, would you do that, and do you believe that helps the Sixers team?
Hmm. If we're talking completely unrealistic,
Mhm.
I would do it. To be quite honest with you, I would do it because at this point, you're getting a facilitator, you're getting a capable playmaker. Obviously, he's not a regular season player, but with how mediocre the Sixers have been this regular season with Paul George, I don't think that aspect even matters. You're also getting a playoff riser. You're getting someone who maximizes Joel Embiid's talent both on and off the court. And obviously, they have to extend him in this hypothetical world. Jimmy would accept that. And the way I look at it is, regardless whether it's Paul George or Jimmy Butler, you're tied to an aging star with an enormous contract for the near future anyways. So why not make that someone who maximizes the Sixers' floor and gives them much more of a competitive edge?
Yeah, I love the takeaway there, and just for the sake of clarity here, it likely would not work as a 1-for-1,
Not at
as
all.
they're both
Yeah.
first apron teams, cannot take in more money than you send out, or I think I said that backwards. But the point being here that it's going to be complicated, the cap manipulation to make this actually happen, and you also got to factor in is, are the Heat actually interested in getting involved in the Paul George business? Which if they're completely against the Bradley Beal business, I can't quite sell myself that Paul George they'll be in on. I certainly prefer Paul George as a basketball player compared to Bradley Beal, but I think the money in the contract and that side of things is really the biggest factor. Frankly, that's why they're staring down the barrel of this entire situation. As Jimmy can code it up as his basketball joy or however he wants to put it, the bottom line is he's not getting the contract that he wants, and that's why all this is coming to the forefront of the surface. But to stick with the overall point here, I'm in agreement with you that I would pull the trigger. I do think the thought process has to come from, you kind of are kicking the can down the line a little bit, that I think we've now seen a half season of the Paul George experience. I don't feel overly confident that the next 3 seasons of it are going to be much better than this. And with Jimmy, if you can get that one playoff Jimmy run, it's worth it. Like, if you can get that one season of him playing his FU basketball, that I'm better than anyone, I'm going to take on whoever you put on me, and I'm going to carry this team regardless of who the other 4 people are on the floor on. The Sixers straight up need that. So I would do it if it was on the table. I don't think it is. And to kind of touch on that and dig in that a little bit further, do you think it is Phoenix that he ends up going, or are there any other destinations that you think are more likely?
I saw Windhorst report this that his market is just extremely weak, so much so that he thinks that it's going to go on. This whole saga is going to go on past his 7 game suspension. I'm not sure how many games left of that suspension that he has. Probably like only 3 at this point. But I don't know. His trade market's really weird. There hasn't really been any surprise teams. It was reported that Memphis and Milwaukee were interested. Then it was also later shut down. I don't know whether it was from the Heat or Butler's camp that they just said don't send him there because obviously he has some leverage to where this is the last year of his contract. So if you're going to trade for him, then you better hope that he wants to stay there with its extension. And if he doesn't, then you're just kind of wasting your future, like a certain team did a few years ago. But yeah, it's just a really weird situation. I don't know if Phoenix is going to do it because it all mainly points to Bradley Beal if he wants to waive his no trade clause.
Right.
I think it's the timing of benching him and Nurkic was interesting because when you consider all this, obviously Bradley Beal, who's supposedly the third option, I don't think at this point in his career he's going to be thrilled with riding the bench. So it's weird. I think if I had to bet, I would do the Suns, but I mean anything can happen.
Yeah, and Bradley Beal pretty much made that clear himself with some of his post-game comments, both from the bench perspective, saying how he's a starter in the league, and also if there's any trade discussions, they're going to have to go through him because he does have that no trade clause. There are 2 players in the NBA with full-on no trade clauses. It's LeBron James and Bradley Beal, which is inherently funny to me. I will say the other factor to consider here, and this is a huge part of this entire conversation for all factors here, frankly, why the door opened for the Sixers to sign Paul George in the first place, but we're starting to really see the effects of the new CBA. And I think more than ever in one of these star situations where they're holding you down, staring down the barrel of the gun and seeing what happens, I do think there's a world where Miami just sits in and takes it and says, Jimmy, you can do whatever you want. We're not trading you if we can't improve because of this apron situation. And now that brings on the other part of this. While Jimmy will be a free agent next year, he still does have a player option. And I think when kind of looking around, and Phoenix is clearly the pathway that he's trying to get on because they seem willing to give him that money and sort of are pretty much the only team where basically saying, I don't care about the CBA. I'm getting the top players, spending whatever money, and we're just going to, deal with the consequences once we get there. Every other team being a little bit more calculated in their approach. So for the Heat specifically, I could see them looking down the barrel, just extending this and letting this go into maybe even the offseason. I also see a world where Jimmy opts into his contract next year, says, I'm taking the $52 million guaranteed, and we'll figure things out as the season goes on. Let's not forget James Harden did the exact same thing with this Sixers team. Different situation, obviously, but I do think that is a premise that could happen. So do you see a world where this extends past the deadline, and could you see Jimmy suiting up for a playoff game for this Heat team this year?
I don't know about playoffs. I mean, I don't know if they're going to make the playoffs,
Fair.
quite honest with you. But
Sure.
I think Pat Riley is definitely stubborn enough to let this go on to even next season because, like you said, he is one of one as a GM in terms of having things done his way. So there's that, and also there's Jimmy Butler, who was equally as stubborn. So I can see the saga lasting a lot longer. I think it is possible that he could gauge the market, and if no team is willing to offer him the deal he wants, he definitely could take that player option from the Heat and let this drag on in the next season, which I think is definitely the most likely. And if Jimmy does play in like a playoff game, I think we're seeing a very disinterested version of him, almost like LeBron in the 2010 series against the Celtics.
And by the way, like I know that seemed to be the final straw of him clearly not caring in the final 2 games that he played, where he was just sitting on the corner. I believe he attempted 6 and 7 shots over the course of his entire shift there. I will note that is not a one-time thing, that I've just flipped on like random Heat games throughout this season and just watched, and it's looked like Jimmy does not feel like playing basketball right now. He's just doing the thing where he sits in the corner playing. We've all seen it. Like we know what we're talking about, where it's a guy doing the cardio, being on the floor, but not actually impacting the game. There's been a lot of that. And that is the frustrating part of Jimmy Butler, that yes, you take the good with it, the playoff Jimmy, the guy that when he's locked in, you can see the level that he plays at, but you got to deal with a whole lot of the baggage. And in every single situation, I can squint and see Jimmy's point for why he's frustrated, but it's every single situation that this continues to happen. So I don't really have a particular interest in getting involved in the Jimmy Butler game at this point in his career. I would probably do it from the standpoint of to get off the Paul George contract. Now, maybe the best case scenario here is Paul George just plays up to the standard of his expectations when he signed it. The Sixers certainly have to hope that direction. But we'll move off the Jimmy conversation from here. I do want to highlight a guy who is also in trade conversations, but has been absolutely excellent for this Sixers team, Guerschon Yabusele. Now, the trade conversations for him are basically on the realization that next year it's unlikely he will be in a Sixers uniform, that it's going to take a lot of hoops to get through to be able to match what will be his market value at this point in the game. And for the cap space guys, and Jacob, feel free to dive in on as much of this if you can dive deeper into it than I can, but it really isn't a cap space sort of thing. Yes, you can talk about the mid-level exception and things you can create, but it's about the percentage above his current contract that you can re-sign a player. Yabu has notably outplayed a minimum by like a considerable margin here. Like, I think he's probably looking down somewhere in the ballpark of like a 3-year, $60 million deal from a team next year. The Sixers are not going to be able to offer that from the restrictions there. So the trade conversations loop into, do you get something in return because you're probably not going to be able to re-sign this guy? Or is it worth it in your eyes to just go through the season and try and figure things out in the summer?
I think knowing how Daryl Morey's mind works, as we've seen throughout these past few seasons, he's not one to tank or sell at the deadline.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to count what they did at the deadline last year as selling, then go ahead. But I think in his mind, the Sixers are better off, contending rather than trying to sell their assets. So with that in mind, I think if Daryl Morey in his calculations feels that this is still a championship caliber team, he's going to hold on to him. But obviously, Daryl knows much more than we do about if the Sixers are capable of resigning him or not. He knows what their cap space plan. He knows maybe Guerschon's intentions, but I think that they'll probably hold on to him unless something drastic happens. And I think, maybe Guerschon in a perfect world, maybe he does love the city of Philadelphia so much that he'll take like a taxpayer MLE, which is worth, I believe, like what, 5-ish million?
Yeah, 5.7, I believe.
Yeah, 5.7. So I mean that's always possible, but I feel like the most logical outcome at least is a team with cap space like the Jazz, Nets, the Wizards. They give him that 3 year 60 million, and then they like sell him at the next deadline for a bunch of picks. And we've seen how inflated this trade market is in terms of value. Like the Nets, I saw are seeking like a first round pick or two for Cam Johnson. So I could see it as a situation like that almost. So if I really had to go with my gut instinct and just how much I've known for the NBA these past few years, I would expect that he is unfortunately gone off the offseason. But to kind of summarize, I think that the Sixers and Daryl Morey, they still want to go all in. So I don't believe like they're going to trade him unless you're getting like someone like Herb Jones, which is obviously not realistic at this point.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, if we're talking the direct Cam Johnson comp here, like if we're talking just a first round pick for Yabusele, I frankly would rather keep him and just see what you can make happen and go to battle with him for this year. Because I would argue there's a larger chance of everything comes together. This team has somewhat of a fighting chance. You have a healthy playoff stretch, and he's like a high-level role player than there is of that draft pick become a guy who improves your odds more than Yabu would himself there. So I do hope that is the case here. With that being said, you mentioned kind of Daryl Morey's thought process. If you were in the GM shoes right here, what would you be targeting at the deadline? It's kind of frustrating that I kind of said this whole first half of the season should be the evaluation period, figure out what your missing pieces are. Yabusele is a clear-cut example who kind of have cut down on that belief of the need for a power forward here, but I think we've seen an increase in the desire for real playmakers. But if you're in the driver's seat of making decisions for the Sixers team, what kind of position or type of players would you be targeting at the deadline?
Well, first of all, I'd file a request for a new job. But no, for real, I mean, you touched on it exactly. Playmaking. That is at this point the biggest toll on this roster, the need for a playmaker. But the most unfortunate thing about that is the big names who offer that, like Malcolm Brogdon, Colin Sexton, those are guys making north of 18 million this year. And in order for the Sixers to get them, they'd have to like give a combination of like KJ,
Yeah.
Oubre, and Caleb, which is just at that point it's not worth doing because you're just gutting your depth so much for that. I think the true answer lies in the free agent market. I published an article on my Substack about it. There's a few targets they can do, obviously depending on what moves they make. Like Markelle Fultz is a guy, which obviously has a mixed response from Philly fans. But Dennis Smith Jr. is a guy I really want. He's almost like a ripoff Chris Dunn with better facilitation.
Love it.
Obviously, he has scoring limitations himself, but he's also a very, very good perimeter defender, which fits right into Nick Nurse when Nick Nurse likes to do. And he's also someone who can collapse the defense, kind of facilitate and play make a little bit, which is exactly what the Sixers need from their guard play, especially in the absence of Jared McCain. Then there is Lonnie Walker, much more limited of a playmaker, but he is a capable defender. He is someone who can kind of score in bunches and kind of be that spark plug that I guess we wished Reggie Jackson was at this point. So he's kind of someone who was immediately, honestly, better than Kyle Lowry, Eric Gordon, and Reggie Jackson. So I think there's something there if they want to go that route. But I think it just mainly depends on, what they want to do. They have a roster spot left. They probably want to preserve that flexibility. It's been the key word we've been hearing for 3 years now,
Yeah.
but it is what it is. In terms of actual trade targets, I think I don't know. There's a lot of weird options right now. I feel like we have to. It's more of a wait and see. I think guys like the Herb Joneses and the Santi Aldamas, they aren't too realistic. But if you're looking at guys like maybe Jake LaRavia from the Grizzlies, who's also a very solid power forward option, not
Yeah.
not the player like Santi is, but like he's still a very very solid all around guy. Like try to target guys like that. So I don't know. I think obviously the power forward Guerschon, I think, fills that role so well. That's really not the main thing that they need. I think he could fit perfectly as that true four next to Embiid. We've seen it a little bit this season, but also maybe like a more versatile option besides Andre Drummond at the center because we seen even yesterday, like Bono was forced to play heavy minutes. And I love Bono. I think he has a lot of potential as a two-way rim running, shot blocking guy, but Sixers needs someone more polished who could maybe offer them a little bit more defensive versatility that Andre Drummond just simply can't.
Yeah, no, a lot of good points there. I'm frustrated. I was banging the Keon Ellis table for a couple weeks, and I do think that
That's not
was
happening at this point, unfortunately.
yeah, I think what we can kind of evaluate from here is that was probably a friction point within the organization with Mike Brown specifically because Keon Ellis was getting coaches' decisions did not play for several games there. Then Mike Brown fired, and he's in the starting lineup for a lot of these games at this point. So love Keon, rooting for the best for him. That would have been an awesome snag, but I don't think that is a possibility there. I love your point. Dennis Smith Jr. is worth a chance for me, absolutely. I also I understand the plan is flexibility, and obviously you want to preserve as much money and have the thought process of you can swing a 2-for-3 deal or 3-for-2 deal where you're bringing in an additional player at the deadline. But you also got to adjust as the situation plays itself out with the number of injuries that this team has, with the clear needs. For me, I need this to be a filled roster. And I also will note a little bit interesting to me that the Sixers did let go of Pete Nance there. Not that I've had the highest of expectations for him. I thought he was just fine for what he was, but I'm curious what they have up their sleeve for what that spot could be. Interesting when you look at their two-way slots right now. Justin Edwards, who, by the way, is showing something on the Sixers team lately, has played very well within his role, and Jeff Doughton, the other option there. Two polar opposite end of the spectrum, as Doughton's the guy that's been around the league, about as experienced of a two-way guy that you will ever see. And then there's Edwards, who is a first-year undrafted free agent and shown some promise there. So I'm curious what their mindset is with that third slot there, but I do think they got to fill things up. And I also will 100% believe they have to add another guard to this roster. And it's frustrating because if Jared McCain were healthy, all these problems that we're talking about, or a lot of them at least, are almost fixed or at least look a lot better. The reality is I don't think you can count on Jared McCain returning this season. I do think it's notable the Sixers have not officially ruled him out, and he continues to just be on the injury report. So holding out a little bit of hope, but I think they obviously got to approach this with a long-term view for Jared. And I think bringing in a real deal, not quite veteran like Kyle Lowry or Reggie Jackson, but a guy with some experience who can take on some ball handling role. I know this player is unrealistic, but a Tyus Jones type player I think would make a lot of sense for this team is where my mind's at.
Yeah, 100%. Like a guy like Tyus Jones who can just be that quality facilitator and ball handler off the pick and roll would be absolutely perfect. I mean, you look around and there's really not that many guys around. Like
No.
maybe DeLon Wright's an option, Seth Curry's an option, but neither of those guys are really worth giving up like a second round pick or two, like at all
Yeah.
at this point. So the market is just so limited. It really just comes down to those three guys, like I said. And I mean, yeah, at this point, the Sixers are in like a really weird position, flexibility wise. And Pete Nance thing was really weird because, like you said, I didn't have these crazy expectations for him. But in like the games I saw, he was like a solid stretch four. So
Yeah.
I don't really know the value of keeping a two-way spot open unless they just want to, further develop talent. But we'll see. I mean, I can't even think of an instance where a team is traded for a two-way player. I mean, but with the way Jared Butler was playing last night, I mean,
I was going to bring that up. Yeah.
yeah, but I don't know. But yeah, Justin Edwards is another guy who's just been excellent. Like we talked about him last night, or not last episode. I saw how terrific he was in the G League being there. Like he really just is a terrific all around player. He hasn't gotten to really show much of his all around game, obviously, because he's little bit more of a restricted role in the minutes he's been given these past few games. But like he really is a guy who's blossoming into a kind of under the radar, solid 3-and-D guard or wing in the making. Like he's defensively a little bit of limitations, like he's gotten in foul trouble early, but that's what comes with guarding guys like Kevin Durant.
Yeah,
But yeah,
can't
I
blame him.
like what I've seen from him as a spot up shooter and even as an athletic finisher in little instances. So yeah, definitely on the Justin Edwards hype train.
Yeah, 100% there. Did you have a chance to talk to him at all down there in Delaware?
Unfortunately, not yet. Hopefully, whenever I go down there again, hopefully. But yeah,
He's a good dude. He's luckily Philly guy, went to Emotep Charter, had a chance to check him out a little bit in high school, and then have interviewed him a couple times. He's kind of a shy dude, so it's kind of interesting there. Hoping he's growing into his pants a little bit now that he's in the NBA and got all that side of things. But a good dude, rooting for him, and has brought something to the Sixers team. So shout out to Justin Edwards. We'll dig in a little bit deeper on the trade stuff the next time we do this, but on our final messages here. So as we currently sit, the Sixers still in 11th place, still 5 games below 500 there, still have some work to do. What is next? Do you think that they have the potential to rip off this streak of wins, or do you think that I'm kind of settling in the realization this may just be a fringe sit in the play-in and have to battle your way out? Has your level of optimism for a significant climb up the standings been downgraded since the last time we had this conversation?
this team is a new version of the 2022 Los Angeles Clippers, for being completely honest.
Ooh,
Because we've touched on it multiple times throughout these episodes, right? You're not going to gain chemistry when injuries keep happening, right? And the Sixers at this point, obviously, they're only 5 games below 500 in January. Anything can happen. But what we've seen throughout this team is, they take 2 steps forward and at this point, 6 steps back.
yeah.
Because we've seen them run off a few games against weak opponents, even teams against like the Celtics and Spurs. But then we also see them drop games against like teams like the Warriors and Kings, which both were winnable. I mean, the Warriors game, they were on the second end of the back to back. They were winded, but like games like that Kings game, like we've just seen poor composure and just inconsistent effort all around, which could be a coaching thing, which could be roster construction, it can be a lot of things. But at this point, I think we know who this team is. This is a team who just can't consistently get healthy. As soon as Embiid looked to return to form, he just all of a sudden had a foot sprain. So,
Yep.
not trying to be negative, but at this point, you got to be realistic. I feel like this is a team who finishes with like at least 37 wins to 43-ish. Like it's a team who's going to squeeze into the play-in regardless, I feel like, because the East is that weak. But I mean, from there, I mean, who knows? Because do we trust this team to somehow come together in a do or die play-in game? Like, do we? Like, obviously, the play-in teams in the range, like you got the Pistons, you got the Hawks, like those are beatable teams. But like,
It
do we
better
trust
be.
this team to
Yeah.
really come together and fight for their lives and then play whoever is the first or second seed in the playoffs? I mean, I don't know at this point.
Yeah, it's tough to have any level of confidence right now. I do hope this team can find a little bit more of consistent play in the coming weeks, but it has not been overly promising there. So before we sign up, Jacob, I want you to drop what else you got going on. I saw the 76 Reasons podcast, correct, as well as your
Mm-hmm.
Substack and Sixers Country as usual. What all you rolling with these days?
Yeah, pretty much a Substack.
Yes.
I'm just kind of
Yes.
trying to do more insightful pieces, like my piece on the guard depth with McCain out, and obviously, like you said, I started a new podcast with 5 Reasons Network with Anthony Pasquale. Or I'm so sorry if I butchered his last name, but yeah, it's been cool. We basically just talk Sixers like we do here. Substack, always looking to just kind of do more think pieces, doing more in-depth content that you fail to get on other sites, just trying to make myself stand out, just giving just a new lens on different stuff. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what I'm doing at this point.
Yeah, well, appreciate you hopping on and chopping up with me, Jacob. We'll be keeping on doing these throughout the rest of the regular season and beyond. So even if the Sixers are leaving us down, we're going to keep battling through with you guys. Appreciate each and one of you guys getting involved in the conversation, tuning in and leaving the comments in the chat. Does mean a lot there. We're going to keep battling through this season one game at a time. So appreciate each and one of you guys rocking with us. Make sure to drop a subscribe if you have not already. Drop a like on this video as well.